88 years. That's how long, in total, the 3 child murder cases that I bring you from the UK to the USA and then back to the UK took to solve. Enjoy. Nicola Fellows and Karen Hadaway were 2 9-year-old best friends who lived near each other on the Moulscombe estate in the north of Brighton, South England, but attended different schools. At around 3:30 p.m. on the 9th of October 1986, the 2 girls returned home from school before going out to play. They never returned home. Known as the Babes in the Wood murders, the murder of 9-year-old Nicola Fellows and Karen Hadaway triggered the longest running and largest scale investigation ever conducted by Sussex police. And it took 2 trials and 32 years for the killer to finally be brought to justice. And trust me, these aren't the only twists to this story that will totally blow your mind. If you're hooked on the story so far, do subscribe, give the video a like, drop a comment when you're ready, and donate. Hit the thanks button below. I'll appreciate you. At around 5 p.m. on the date in question, 9th of October 1986, the mother of Nicola Fellows, whose name is Susan Fellows, saw Nicola and Karen playing with their roller skates. That was the last time that she ever saw her daughter alive. The 2 girls were seen at some point by a 14-year-old acquaintance of theirs near a parade of shops in the Lewes Road area. This acquaintance told the girls to go home as their parents were bound to become worried. However, Nicola said to Hadaway, quote, "Come on, let's go over to the park," unquote, in reference to Wild Park, where they knew they were not allowed. That was Nicola's personal response to the advice of the acquaintance that I've just mentioned. We all wish that she'd followed the advice of the acquaintance, but neither she nor Karen, of course, deserved what actually happened to them. Anyway, at around 6:30 p.m, the girls were seen near a police box on Lewes Road, and that was near where a man whose name was Russell Bishop, a local roofer, was also seen, and he was wearing what appeared to be a light blue top. That was a quotation, not sure who it comes from. The witness, I would presume, but I've got no name for the witness. Now, Russell Bishop, I'll just call him Bishop, actually knew the family of Nicola Fellows, and that very day he'd gone to the house to speak to a lodger who lived there. But Nicola, for whatever reason, had been really rude to him. She had told him to go away, and she had referred to the 16-year-old girl that he was in a sexual relationship with as a slag. On having her daughter fail to return home by bedtime, Karen's mother made a frantic 999 call.
Where were these children last seen?
They were last seen over at the Coldine shops at the bottom of Coldine Line. I thought my little one had gone up to her friend. And when she didn't come back about when it started getting dark, I phoned her friend, and her friend's mum said she hasn't been up there.
And what time was it they were last seen?
Pardon?
What time were they last seen?
At about 5:30. It's not like her to go, you know, too far away unless she's going usually to a friend's house.
And who am I speaking to now? Mrs.
Hadaway.
Hadaway, Hadaway, is that?
Right, yeah.
Who's the other mother, Mrs.
Mrs. Streeter. Sorry, Mrs. Fellows.
Right, and they're 2 9-year-old girls?
2 9-year-olds.
Any idea what they were wearing?
Yeah, my daughter was wearing a grey pleated skirt and a green Coldine jumper with Coldine School written on it.
Yeah, what? A green sweater, you say?
Green sweater.
Right, and the other girl?
Pink trainers, white socks. I haven't got the faintest idea. So what was Nicola wearing? A peachy brown sweatshirt and a checked skirt. Got no socks on, red shoes. Red shoes, no socks.
Sorry, peachy brown sweatshirt.
And a brown striped skirt. Checked skirt.
All right. I'll get somebody to come and see you. If they return in the meantime, if you can let us know. And try and check around to various other people.
Yeah, well, we've been walking around for hours. I've nearly collapsed.
Yeah. Well, I'll get somebody to come up and see you.
Okay, thanks then.
A search party of around 200 police and neighbours was organised. A helicopter was brought in to help search Wild Park. Bishop joined in the search and claimed that his terrier, Misty, was a highly trained tracker dog and that it was insured for all of £17,000. The very next day, the bodies of the girls were found in Wild Park by searchers Kevin Rowland and his friend Matthew Marchant. The bodies were found hidden in a makeshift den in the park. They were lying across one another, having both been strangled and essayed. Bishop immediately fell under suspicion for the murder of the two girls. He was very closely involved in the search. When the bodies of the girls were found, Bishop was close by and ran towards the scene with a police constable. However, the officer recalled that Bishop didn't get close enough even to see the girls' bodies properly. The story that Bishop gave to the police regarding where he was at the time of the girls' disappearance was full of inconsistencies. He told detectives that on the evening in question, he had gone to Moulsecoombe because he intended to steal a car from the nearby University of Sussex campus. He also claimed that he had gone to a newsagent to buy a newspaper, but realised that he had no money. He also claimed that he had planned to see his 16-year-old girlfriend that evening, but then had chosen not to go because he bought some cannabis and just went home and smoked that instead. He kept tailoring his story to fit the evidence, claiming that he had felt the girls' necks for a pulse after finding them dead. This was his way of explaining any potential exchange of trace evidence. And the police weren't stupid. Remember, one of them has already reported that the man, Bishop, didn't actually even get close enough to the girls to see them, or see their bodies rather, when they were found. So there was no way that he'd gone and put his hand on their necks to check whether they were still alive. So the police, of course, arrested him on suspicion of the murder of the two girls on the 31st of October. Now, I've referenced Bishop's story that he had been planning to steal a car. Let's take a closer look into Bishop's background then, because to say something like that, there must have been some kind of criminal offending to his past. The man was born on the 9th of February 1966. A former friend of his called Jeff Caswell, who used to go fishing with the man, described him as a habitual liar. Quote, "He was a typical lad around the town that time in the 80s. He'd grown a moustache and he had this car that he'd race everywhere, and he was always telling lies, trying to big himself up. He was only about 5'5" tall and weighed around 8 stone, and I think he suffered from little man syndrome. He was always telling porkies about this and that. He was also a thief. He'd break into cars and he'd steal stuff. He'd been a roofer but was going nowhere really." Unquote. Bishop grew up in a family with his parents and his 4 brothers. His mother, Sylvia, who was an internationally renowned dog trainer, was described in court as domineering. After educational problems and dyslexia, Bishop was sent away at the age of 15 to a special needs school, which was St Mary's Horham in Maynard's Green. However, he was removed from the school at the request of the then head teacher. Bishop ran away and hitchhiked home to Brighton. At the time of the murders of Nicola Fellows and Karen Hadaway, Bishop, who was 20 years old, was working as a roofer and also living in a ground floor flat in the Hollingdean area of Brighton. Bishop was fined £200 for burglary in 1984. He also stole car radios and hot-wired vehicles. That's what you do when you're nicking a vehicle. I don't know exactly what it means though. I think it means getting the engine to work without having the key. Don't know exactly how you do it though. Bishop also claimed to have been wrongly arrested on suspicion of involvement in the Brighton bombing. That was a bombing directed at the government of the UK at the time, Margaret Thatcher's Conservatives, and there were victims from that bombing. It was carried out by the IRA, and it's quite a crazy idea that Bishop would have come anywhere near the suspicion of the police officers for that particular offence. So we're seeing that what the former friend of Bishop told us was true. He was a thief, and in fact it was reported in a newspaper, The Independent, in 2018 that, quote, as even his own 2018 defence barrister admitted, in 1986 Russell Bishop was a semi-literate, occasional, not very successful car thief, an occasional burglar. And if you're wondering about the year 2018, you probably guessed that was the year of the man's second trial for the murders of Nicola Fellows and Karen Hadaway. Bishop's trial for both the rape and the murder of Nicola Fellows and Karen Hadaway took place in December 1987 at Lewes Crown Court, and it concluded with Bishop's acquittal.
Not guilty, Yay!
This was how members of his family greeted the not guilty verdict. Tell me. We now know he'd got away with murder. Bishop would even return to the estate in Mulscombe where he and his young victims had lived.
I've had a couple of people come up to me since I've been out and said, look, I thought you was guilty. And I've set my apologies. And I have, and I've started talking again and it's been fine.
Bishop later sold his story as a wrongfully accused person to the News of the World for £15,000. The acquittal was due, in fact, to a series of blunders in the prosecution's case. The pathologist and forensic investigation team had failed to record the temperatures of the bodies and therefore couldn't accurately state the time of death of the two victims. At the trial, the prosecution suggested that the girls were killed between 6:15pm and 6:30pm. But without scientific evidence to back up the time of the murders, the prosecution couldn't challenge Bishop's many alibis for the night of the murders. Though the girls were fatally strangled, neither measurements of hand marks around their necks nor fingerprints left by the strangler were taken. Forensic scientists didn't analyse blood discovered on Hadaway's underwear. A key piece of the prosecution's case rested on the recovery of a blue Pinto brand sweatshirt. The top was found close to the railway line of Mulscombe Station. Police believed that Bishop had discarded the top after attacking and killing the girls, and they were confident that the clothing held a cache of forensic clues. However, the police failed to properly preserve the evidence, which of course allowed Bishop's defence team to cast doubt on the reliability of the material. Under questioning, Bishop denied that the sweatshirt belonged to him, but his girlfriend, Jennifer Johnson, alleged that the clothing was Bishop's. The prosecution hoped that this would undermine Bishop's credibility and portray him as a liar who was trying to distance himself from a crucial piece of evidence. However, at the trial, Johnson changed her story, telling the jury that she had never seen the top before. Johnson also gave statements to defence counsel in which she alleged that she had in fact never made her witness statement that confirmed that Bishop was the owner of the sweatshirt, and that the statement where she allegedly said that the sweatshirt was Bishop's had in fact been fabricated by the police, and that her initials that were on the statement had been forged by the police. The judge, Mr. Justice Shyman, directed the jury that unless they were sure first that the girls were dead by 6:30pm, they should acquit. The prosecution, as I say, believed that the girls were killed between 5:15pm and 6:30pm. Earlier I said 6:15pm and 6:30pm, sorry. However, witnesses stated that they saw the girls alive at 6:30pm and they saw Bishop leaving Wilds Park at 6:30pm. So on those conflicting pieces of evidence, and also combined with the failure of the pathologist and the forensic investigation team to record what they needed to record, Bishop walked. On the 4th of February 1990, a young girl called Rachel Watts was roller skating around her estate in Brighton when her dad suggested that she should go and buy some sweets from the local shop. On discovering that the shop was shut, Rachel turned back but became confused. Her family, you see, had just moved to the area, so she didn't know the streets. She did know that she shouldn't speak to strangers. Then again, the young man, who happened to be a 23-year-old, who was working on his red Ford Cortina car, didn't seem in any way threatening. She'd be fine asking him for directions. But the thing is, as she approached the man and started speaking to him, what happened next was all a blur. He swooped her up and dumped her in the boot of his car. Now, the girl tried to keep a cool head. She took off her skates so that she could run at the first opportunity and pierced the bonnet of the car so that someone could possibly hear her scream. Of course, she was 7, the person who had abducted her was 23. there was no way she was going to be able to outrun him. The man who abducted her proceeded, once he'd got her somewhere out of sight, to grape and strangle her. This took place in Devil's Dyke, which is a popular beauty spot on the South Downs Way. The man, Russell Bishop in other words, left Rachel for dead, but she was stronger than he anticipated. She regained consciousness after 20 minutes and scrambled to find help. She was naked and she was bleeding. A couple, thankfully, eventually picked her up and alerted the police. This time, the investigation was careful and effective, and Bishop didn't get away with it. He was convicted in December 1990 and he was given 14 years, and that was his minimum term before he would be allowed to apply for parole. It, of course, wasn't very difficult for the police to trace the whereabouts of Bishop when the change in the double jeopardy laws came in. Double jeopardy rules had seemed to eliminate any possibility that Bishop might one day face a new trial for the murders, given his conviction for the abduction, molestation and attempted murder of Rachel Wart, which took place in the Whitehawk area of Brighton. However, new legislation in 2005 meant that a criminal could now face a new trial for a crime that they'd previously been cleared of if substantial new evidence came to light. In September 2006, the High Court decided that there wasn't enough evidence, however, for Bishop to face a second trial for the murders. In response to that, a company called Eurofins Forensic Services were engaged by the police, and this was the same forensics team that helped bring the killers of Stephen Lawrence to justice. You need to look that up if you're not aware of that case. Senior scientific advisor Roy Green at Eurofins was asked in August 2012 to re-examine the evidence, and he recovered a 1,000,000,000 DNA match that linked Bishop to the discarded sweatshirt. A taping from Karen's left forearm was also found to contain Bishop's DNA. In May 2016, Bishop was removed from his cell at Frankland Prison in County Durham and taken to the local police station, where he was arrested for the murders of Hadaway and Fellows, having no doubt thought that he'd got away with it, it was over, it was never something he was going to be caught for, no doubt.
As I said, I'm putting the technical side of this to one side, okay? And you've told us that refer back to what was said before, okay? But we're asking you now, that's not clear to us, okay? Right now, where your position stands on touching Karen's forearm.
I didn't touch no one, so I'm innocent, and as I said, I've got no comment to make.
But that's what I'm asking you. You've said you didn't touch her.
Well, you've got my answer, so right, down and then move on. Please.
No, that's fine. I just want to be clear. You're saying you didn't touch Karen Hadaway.
Listen, I've got no comment to make. Right. Everything what's been said's been said. I've got nothing else to add. Please, just answer questions, let me answer it, whether it be no comment, whatever, and move on. I'm not going to sit here like I did 13 years ago and go over and over and over around in circles. Not happening.
In December 2017, the Court of Appeal ordered quashing of the 1987 acquittals and called for a second jury trial for Bishop. On the 2nd of February 2018, the Press Association reported that Bishop was to stand trial at the Old Bailey, accused of the murder of Nicola Fellows and Karen Hadaway, who were killed in Brighton in 1986. The trial was scheduled for the 15th of October 2018. Bishop was charged and pleaded not guilty. On the 10th of December 2018, he was found guilty of the murder and the rape of both Nicola Fellows and Karen Hadaway. It was at this point that we learned more of the detail to what had happened to the two little girls. The judge said that Bishop was a predatory paedophile who, having seen Nicola and Karen play near the entrance to the park at around 5:15 p.m. on the 9th of October 1986, remained in the area in case a chance arose to lure them into the woods in the park. And sadly, that chance did arise at around 6:30 p.m. when Bishop saw them not far from him outside the southern end of the park. Taking advantage of his previous dealings with their families and with them, and also of his own local knowledge, he then lured them to a secluded den in the woods. and at that spot, entirely for his own sadistic pleasure, he subdued them. He punched Nicola in the face and put his hand over her nose and mouth in the process, and then, in turn, he strangled and essayed each of them. The worst of the essay was inflicted on Nicola, including part of it after her death, because earlier that afternoon, as I mentioned earlier, she had been rude to him in relation in particular to his 16-year-old girlfriend, calling her a slag, you might recall. The judge said that the terror that each girl must have suffered in their final moments is unimaginable. Bishop then left their bodies where they were and walked home. He laid them across each other. He dumped his pinto sweatshirt en route to avoid having anything incriminating on him being linked to him. Once he got home, to avoid again having any incriminating evidence on him, he bathed and washed the remainder of his clothing. The following day, he pretended to take part as an innocent helper in the search for the girls. After the discovery of the bodies, he pretended that he had checked their pulses so that he would have an excuse if anything was found on him that was linked to the girls. After his subsequent arrest, he falsely pretended that he was innocent. In the course of this second trial, the man falsely pretended again that he was innocent, and he also made the allegation, which he was legally entitled to do in law, that the father of Nicola Fellows, Barry Fellows, could have been the murderer instead. The judge said that just shows how remorseless he was, and the judge also observed that Nicola's father, Barry Fellows, stood in the witness box and dealt with all the questions that were asked of him in cross-examination, despite the understandable distress that it caused him. Whereas Bishop, in contrast, after his initial cross-examination by the prosecution had exposed him as a PDF file and a liar, refused to answer any more questions and subsequently refused to attend court. The judge delivered the sentencing hearing then in Bishop's absence. The judge made the point that Bishops had been convicted on the strength of the new and compelling evidence against him that had been unnerved. He's no less made the point about the similarities between the murders of Nicola and Karen and the offences that Bishop had committed against Rachel Watts, aged 7 in 1990, which clearly showed the man to be a violent PDF file who carried out another essay on a prepubescent girl just for sadistic pleasure and the satisfaction of dominance. The judge gave Bishop 2 life sentences with a minimum term of 36 years. At this point, Bishop was 52.
We brought nothing into the world and we take nothing out.
It has been a long wait for justice. 32 years since 2 heartbroken families buried the little girls so cruelly taken from them. Today, as at the second time of asking, justice finally caught up with their killer, Russell Bishop. 3 of the parents were at the Old Bailey to witness it.
It's been a hard, long, sad and often lonely road. Like a roller coaster, ups and downs, highs and lows. What we've got there.
Their view of the man who was once a friend and neighbour.
He's a coward without a conscience. After 32 years of fighting, we finally have justice for Karen and Nicola. Time stood still for us in 1986. To us, them beautiful girls would always be 9 years old. They would never grow up. We've been deprived of a happy life to watch them grow into adults. What people like Bishop inflict on the families of their victims is a living death. They take the lives of children, but they also take the lives of the families left behind. Kaz and Nikki, as they were affectionately known, friends playing out together, only to have their lives wiped out by a sexual deviant, a monster. What's been hard, horrendous and heartbreaking is to hear that they were murdered by a disgusting paedophile who we actually knew, and them 2 girls liked and trusted. He abused that trust. Heart-wrenching. Bishop doesn't deserve to breathe the same clean air as we do. After all, he decided that day to strangle the life out of our 2 angels, leaving them no air to breathe. What makes a man want to squeeze the life out of 2 innocent children with his bare hands? Unbelievable. when he had a child himself and another on the way.
The families of Nicola Fellows and Karen Hadaway won a settlement from the police for their failures in the initial investigation into the two murders. Without those failures, it's very probable that Bishop would have been sentenced, or rather would have been convicted of the two murders back in 1987 and gone to prison at that point. That would have been of important benefit to Rachel Watts, for instance, but also it clearly would have given the family a sense of justice. You might be wondering about Jennifer Johnson, who was the girlfriend of Russell Bishop at the time of the murders, and who said one thing about the sweatshirt and then another thing about it in court. In May 2021, she was found guilty of perjury and perverting the course of justice because, to remind you, she had lied about the sweatshirt in the original trial and she admitted it at this point. She got 6 years for perjury and perverting the course of justice, and the judge who sentenced her, Mr. Justice Fraser, stated that her crimes were, quote, at the most serious end of the scale, unquote. Because think about it, her truthful testimony, if she'd bothered to give it, could have nailed Bishop. The woman didn't attend her sentencing hearing. She copied the behaviour of her ex-boyfriend. As at the time of this recording, she's doing her time at HMP Bronzefield, which is Britain's highest security prison for women. On the 20th of January 2022, Russell Bishop died in prison of cancer. On the 4th of April 1988, a jogger who was passing just west of Spencerville in Indiana, America, found the body of a little girl lying in a ditch. Nearby lay a little girl's shoe along with a shopping bag containing a sex toy. The little girl was 8-year-old April Tinsley. April had been raped and then strangled to death. While she'd been dead for 1 to 2 days before being found, she'd only been dumped in the ditch 4 hours before she was spotted by the said jogger. It would take 3 decades plus some important breakthroughs in DNA analysis before April's killer was caught. April was a member of the children's choir at the Faith United Methodist Church, as well as being a second grader at Fairfield Elementary School. On the 1st of April 1988, which happened to be Good Friday, she was playing out with 2 of her friends and they were moving between houses. On backtracking around 3 p.m. to retrieve her umbrella, she disappeared. April's mother reported her daughter missing to the police when her little girl didn't come home for dinner that night. The initial search for April included 250 Fort Wayne police officers and 50 volunteers. A witness later reported seeing a white man in his 30s forcing a girl believed to be April into his blue pickup truck. With the launch of the murder investigation, which began 3 days after April was reported missing, in other words, the second her body was found, 2 local radio stations immediately established a reward fund. Additional funds were raised for April's burial and for her family. April's memorial service was held on the 8th of April 1988 at the Faith United Methodist Church, and April was buried in the Green Lawn Memorial Park. The early police investigation led authorities to a 34-year-old suspect who was charged with child molest you-know-what-ation in a separate case. However, the man was acquitted of those charges the next month. 90 members of the Fort Wayne community formed a volunteer group to help police solve cases of missing children. Originally, that group was called April, which stood for Associated Parents Regional Independent League, and later it stood for Abduction, Prevention, Reconnaissance and Information League. Early on in the investigation as well, police released a composite sketch of the suspect. It was based on the account of the witness who said that they'd seen April's kidnapper. On the 26th of April 1988, police sent DNA samples of April along with that of 5 suspects to a private lab in Germantown, Maryland for profiling. However, the results came back inconclusive. Fast forward 17 years to the 24th of June 2005, and please keep in mind all the suffering and the not knowing who had done that awful thing to their daughter that the family of the little girl must have suffered throughout all those years. the Tinsley family held a press conference at the Allan County Courthouse asking for leads in April's case. And then 4 years after that, in June 2009, Indiana authorities asked the FBI, who had a task force called Child Abduction Rapid Deployment, or CARD, to help them solve April's murder. On the 21st of May 1990, police found a message on a St. Joseph Township barn that said, and I will read it exactly as I see it in front of me without making any corrections. I kill 8-year-old April Marie Tinsley. Did you find the other shoe? Ha ha, I will kill again. That message was written with crayons that were found near the barn. Investigators initially believed that it could be connected to the murder of a 7-year-old girl called Sarah Jean Bowker. Her body had been found on the 14th of June 1990 in Fort Wayne. Local and state police formed a homicide team, and they did that in April 1991 to investigate both the murder of April and the murder of Sarah Jean Bowker. However, on the 7th of August 1991, the FBI said that even though there were lots of similarities between the two murders, ultimately they were unrelated. Flipping back forward to the Memorial Day weekend of 2004, 4 notes were found in the Fort Wayne area, which are again believed to have been written by whoever killed April. 3 of those notes were left on girls' bicycles and another one was left in a mailbox. 3 notes were placed in plastic bags along with used condoms, as well as Polaroid pictures of the lower part of a man's body. One of the notes said, and again I'll read it exactly as I see it, "Hi honey, I've been watching you. I am the same person that kidnapped and raped and killed April Tinsley. You are my next victim. If you don't report this to the police and if I don't see this in the paper tomorrow or on the local news, I will blow up your house." And I did change one word there. I had to say grape. I have to be wary because YouTube has strict decency policies. This guy is obviously, well, we know what he is. He's an evil animal. Kidnapping, raping and murdering a little girl wasn't enough for him. He had to taunt her family, taunt the police, taunt whole society as well. Total sicko. Anyway, the DNA from the condoms that had been left with the notes matched the police's DNA profile of the suspect. The notes had come from April's killer. The FBI's Behavioural Analysis Unit created a profile of the suspect in 2009, describing him as a preferential child bleep offender, meaning he has a long-term and persistent sexual desire for very, very, very young people. I dare not say the word for the reason that I mentioned earlier. The profile described the murderer as a white male. At this time he was in his 40s or 50s and he was living or working in the northeast Fort Wayne, Allan County area on a low to medium income. In April of the same year, 2009, the TV show America's Most Wanted ran a segment on April's case and asked for tips. In June 2015, the Virginia-based company Paraben released a snapshot composite sketch of the suspect based on information from the man's DNA. Police released an updated version of this sketch in early May 2016. Also in 2016, the investigative series Crime Watch Daily covered April's murder in an episode of the show. And then on the 15th of July 2018, April's case was featured in an episode of On the Case with Paul Lazarn, which aired in something of an ironic twist just hours after an arrest was made in April's case. So, who had the police just taken into custody? In May 2018, a Fort Wayne Police Department detective sent a sample of the suspect's DNA to the forensics company Paraben Nanolabs, which used the genealogy website GEDmatch to identify the suspect's relatives. On July the 2nd, 2018, the genealogist C.C. Moore narrowed down the list of suspects to 2 brothers, one of whom having been a 59-year-old by the name of John Miller. Miller lived in Grable, Indiana, and his neighbours described him as secluded and often angry. The police found used condoms in Miller's trash, and from those they collected samples of the man's DNA. It was an exact match with the suspect's DNA. Detectives approached Miller at his house on July the 15th, 2018 and asked him to come and talk to them at the police station. After advising him of his rights, investigators asked him if he knew why they wanted to talk to him. According to police, he replied, April Tinsley. During an interview at the police station, he confessed to the murder, saying he abducted April and then raped her before choking her to death in his trailer. Officials charged Miller with the murder and also with child you-know-what-ation and confinement. And even though he'd confessed to the murder, for some reason in a court hearing on the 19th of July 2018, he pleaded not guilty. But then on December the 7th, 2018, the man changed his plea to guilty, saying again what he had done to April and adding that he had strangled her with his bare hands. He got 80 years in prison. It was 50 for the murder and 30 for the child you-know-what-ation.
His attorney read a statement from Miller. He said he accepted responsibility and wished it never happened. He apologized to the family and the community and said nothing will make up for it. He said there's not enough to ease the family's pain, but many of those family members broke down in the court sentencing today. 4 of them actually read statements, including Janet Tinsley, April's mother. She talked about how this tore their family apart. She talked about how this was an act of a cold-hearted monster, and the family had lived in fear the past 30 years with April's killer on the loose. She said, you took her life and we want yours, but we won't get it. After that court hearing today, we did ask her about the plea deal. She was very vocal about the fact that they didn't agree with accepting a plea deal for April's killer. This is what she had to say, and prosecutor Karen Richards.
Do you understand now why they wanted the plea deal instead of the death penalty like you originally said?
Yeah. Eventually it'll sink in on me.
Our experience with the death penalty has been that the appeals process is incredibly lengthy.
After his sentencing, Miller was sent to the Indiana Department of Correction. The earliest that Miller would have been able to get out would have been the 15th of July 2058, at which point he would have had to be 99. However, Miller, the killer and child rapist, died of natural causes on the 4th of September 2025. On the 8th of October 1992, the body of a 7-year-old girl from Sunderland in northeast England was found in a derelict building in a high street. The girl was called Nikki Allan and she'd gone missing the evening before on leaving her grandfather's home and heading home. Her body had numerous stab wounds and her skull had been shattered. After denying Nikki's murder multiple times, 24-year-old local man George Heron finally confessed to the crime, only for the twist of the century to later unravel. Nikki lived on a council estate in Weregarth in Sunderland, and she lived with her mother, Sharon Henderson, her stepfather, her sister and her 2 half-sisters. On the 7th of October 1992, she was walking home from her grandfather's flat, which was on the same estate, when she disappeared. She set off at 8:30 p.m. When Sharon got home, her daughter was nowhere to be seen. More than 100 neighbours helped to search for Nikki. The following day, Nikki's shoes and coat were spotted outside the nearby derelict Quayside Old Exchange building in High Street East. Her body was then found inside the basement of the building. It had 37 stab wounds and her head had been bludgeoned by a brick. Following an extensive police investigation, in late 1993, George Heron, a young man who lived near Nikki, stood trial at Leeds Crown Court for Nikki's murder. A knife matching Nikki's stab wounds, you see, had been found where Heron lived. Blood splatters were also found on Heron's shoes and clothing. Heron's sister, furthermore, had told police that after Heron returned home on the night of Nikki's murder, he'd gone straight to the bathroom for a good half hour, something that the man didn't usually do. He'd gone to the bathroom to wash both himself and his clothes. Now, Heron denied being out on the evening of Nikki's murder, but 4 witnesses said that they'd seen a man at the Boar's Head pub and the Clarendon pub who matched his description. The man was also seen buying cheese and onion crisps, which were Nikki's favourites, and police believed that the man had used the crisps to lure Nikki into the building. After 3 days of questioning, Heron confessed to Nikki's murder, despite having previously denied it no fewer than 120 times. The evidence against Heron was circumstantial though. For instance, cheese and onion are the favourite flavour of crisps for millions of people. Despite the circumstantial nature of the evidence though, police believed that the man would be sent down. However, the case against Heron collapsed after the judge ruled that Heron's taped confession to the murder was inadmissible. The judge blamed heavy-handed police tactics for the outcome of the trial because what the judge had to do was to direct the jury to acquit Heron, and they did. After that, Heron was given a change of identity and was moved out of Sunderland, despite the fact that he had been found not guilty under the circumstances that I've said. That no less leaves us with an important question. How did Nikki's blood get onto the shoes and clothing of George Heron if he didn't do it? I can't answer that. Another important question. If George Heron didn't kill Nikki Allan, who did? In February 2014, a serial killer by the name of Stephen Grieveson, who was already in prison for murder, was arrested on suspicion of Nikki's murder. However, the case against him was soon dropped because there just wasn't enough evidence to push a case. But then, on the 17th of April 2018, Northumbria police raided a house in the Stockton area of Teesside and arrested a man on suspicion of Nikki's murder. The man was called David Thomas Boyd and he was 54 years old at this point.
Yeah, how are you doing? From this? No, I'm from the police. Come have a word? Yeah. Cheers. Could you do us a favour and just knock the telly off for a second? What? Could you do us a favour and just knock the telly off just so you can hear what I'm saying? Thanks, mate. Dude, I'm Terry, this is Marty. We're part of the team that's re-investigating the murder of Nikki Allan. Yeah. Okay. Part of that investigation has led us to suspect that you may have had some involvement in that. Okay. I'm arresting you on suspicion. Okay, of that offence. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your offence if you do not mention, when questioned, something which you later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. Just leave your phone there.
In June 2022, the man appeared at Newcastle Crown Court via video link and pleaded not guilty to Nikki's murder. So, why did the police think that Boyd had done it? At the time of Nikki's murder, Boyd had been the partner of a lady called Caroline Branton, who occasionally babysat Nikki. The police had found some of Boyd's DNA on Nikki's clothing. Boyd's explanation for that was that on the night of Nikki's murder, he'd been standing out on the balcony and he'd spat. He said that the spit probably landed on Nikki and that she'd then wiped it off with her hands and got it on her face and her clothing as a result of that. And honestly and truly, that was his explanation. It turned out that Boyd knew the layout of the old exchange building where Nikki's body had been found and that he had used the same window through which the building had been accessed apparently a few days before Nikki's murder when he took a boy there to search for pigeons. Additionally, at the time of Nikki's murder, in other words, not long after Nikki's body had first been discovered, Boyd was questioned by the police, but he'd misled them about his whereabouts. He had told them that he'd gone to the fish and chip shop an hour before he actually had. Boyd was, in addition, thought to physically resemble the sketch of the man that eyewitnesses had said they'd seen walking with Nikki. Mind you, they'd said the same about George Heron, and look how that turned out.
Back in the day, there's a picture of at the back of the building. So if I show you those, you might be able to confirm then. So, is this how you can remember the back of the building? Just for the record, that's TR5. That looks like quite overgrown, and there's a bricked up window there. And then we've got TR6.
That was one we went through, I think.
Right, okay, so you're putting, there's a window there that looks half boarded up, or maybe 3/4 boarded up?
Yeah, we'll go for it in there, in the middle.
You would go into that? Alright. How high is that? Because it's difficult from a picture. Can you remember how high that is to get into?
Well, I couldn't tell you.
You can't remember?
I can't remember.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine.
I know it's pretty high because I pulled myself up.
Right. So you had to physically pull yourself
yeah.
up there. Okay, and you would have been, what, 25 at the time?
Yeah.
Like a grown man, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So you remember that being quite high?
Yeah.
Okay. And you said Colin was just a kid?
Yeah.
So how did Colin get into there?
Just him up and that.
You lifted him up?
Yeah.
Right. Can you remember doing that?
No, not really. I suppose that's how he got in.
Right. Okay. What I don't want you to do, David, is just guess things, alright? You know and I know and everyone else in Sunderland knows that Nicky's body was found inside the old Exchange building in Hendon on the morning of the 8th of October 1992, and she'd been murdered. Scientific examination shows us that the most likely point of entry for Nicky into the old Exchange building was via a lower window at the rear of the property, which was accessed over a brick wall. This is the window that you confirmed that you entered the building via during your trip to Colin Pearson only days before. Yeah? We showed you on the photograph and you confirmed that. You confirmed, or you suggested then that you'd had to help Colin into the building. You said you had to pull yourself up.
To eliminate them from the investigation.
Why would you have gone in that window? Was it not boarded up?
It wasn't boarded up, was it?
Right.
It was the only window that I could see that wasn't boarded up, you know.
Okay.
Except for the top ones there. I think they're open, you know.
Right.
So
we're over the wall, we're coming into the building, there's a one open window which would seem to be the only access point. That window, is that onto the first floor, ground floor, basement, do you know?
Well, when you go through that one, it's on the base, I mean the ground floor.
Right. So that's a ground floor
like
window?
Underneath it's on top, you know.
I understand.
Yeah. The first floor, they call it, wasn't that?
Right. Yeah. Because
downstairs is what do you call it?
Basement.
Basement, that's it.
A further compelling fact against Boyd, though, was the fact that he'd been convicted in March 2000 of the indecent assault of a young girl at a park in Stockton. That assault took place on the 8th of April 1999. Boyd had also been convicted of breaching the peace back in 1986. This was an incident in which he'd approached 4 children in Sacriston, County Durham, and grabbed a 10-year-old girl. Interestingly, even though the judge of Boyd's murder trial agreed with the prosecution, who had argued that all the evidence against Boyd was circumstantial, she didn't stop the trial and direct the jury to find Boyd not guilty. They were allowed to go and come up with a verdict of their own, and they found Boyd guilty. That happened on the 12th of May 2023. So now we want to know what exactly led up to Nicky's murder, and we want to know why Boyd did what he did. At 9:43 p.m. on the 7th of October 1992, a lady called Mrs. Doreen Graham saw Nicky sitting on the wall between the bus shelter and the Boar's Head pub in High Street East, Hendon, Sunderland. Nicky told Mrs. Graham that she was waiting for her mother. All along, Boyd was lurking close by, and he presumably heard what Nicky was telling Mrs. Graham. By 9:51 p.m, Boyd was seen with Nicky outside the McFish factory on the Lower High Street in Hendon. He was striding ahead while Nicky trotted behind him, trying to keep up with him. It would have taken about 3 to 4 minutes for him and Nicky to walk from the bus stop to the McFish factory. Remember, Nicky may not have been particularly scared of Boyd because she was vaguely familiar with him because he was the partner of a lady who used to babysit her, so presumably, as I say, she was vaguely familiar with him and as such wouldn't necessarily have protested going off with him. Anyway, Boyd was leading Nicky, of course, to the grounds of the old Exchange building on Low Road. This was a derelict building surrounded by a walled area of rough scrubland. Inside, the building was pitch black. The windows were boarded up, except for that one missing board, which left a gap through which Nicky had been pushed, but in any event, it was late in the evening of an October night. There was no one else around. Once inside, Nicky must have been petrified. It wouldn't have taken the 7-year-old long to appreciate that she was trapped in that cold and dark building, and that the nasty man who had just shoved her in there was coming through the window to get her. Before I go into the detail of how the perpetrator murdered Nikki Allan, if you're wondering whether, given that the man is a PDF file, he committed essay against Nikki, yes, he did. Or at least he tried to.
You were seen with Nikki outside the McFish factory on the lower High Street in Hendon. You were striding ahead whilst Nikki trotted behind you, trying to keep pace with you. You, David Boyd, were leading Nikki Allan to the grounds of the old Exchange building on Low Road. You took her into that rough ground where you sexually assaulted her, or at least attempted to do so. Nikki was heard screaming at around 10 p.m. by Mrs. Osborne, who was in her flat overlooking High Street East. You struck Nikki across the face, causing her lip to bleed. You did this to shut her up. Before or after this, there must have been some sort of a struggle between you as Nikki's anorak came off and she lost both of her shoes. From the moment of her letting out those screams, Nikki's fate was sealed. You decided to kill her, to silence her and to prevent her from telling anyone that you had sexually assaulted her or had attempted to do so.
A forensic scientist involved in the investigation told the jury that the site of the fatal assault was as far away from the window as Nikki could have got on the ground floor, that is, the far wall of the furthest room. No doubt that this is where she ran in order to get as far away as possible from Boyd. Her fear as she saw the man lurching towards her in the dark is unimaginable. Boyd found the little girl standing or sitting against that far wall. It was there that he struck her head at least twice with a brick, fracturing Nikki's skull into several pieces. Although not necessarily immediately fatal, those blows to the head are likely to have rendered Nikki unconscious. Boyd then stabbed Nikki's naked chest and upper body with the knife that he'd brought with him. It was a frenzied attack. 37 stabs being how many the man inflicted on the little girl, remember. Many of the stabs were inflicted through the same stab wound. The knife was described by the pathologist involved as having a tapering blade of around 10 centimetres long. Boyd pushed the blade into Nikki's chest and organs to its fullest extent so that her body bore the marks of the hilt of the knife. Having killed Nikki, Boyd then dragged her body by her ankles down the staircase into the cellar of the old Exchange building, her head bouncing from stair to stair, leaving traces of blood and fibres on the risers. He dragged her body into the far corner of the furthest room and left her, no doubt hoping that her body would remain undiscovered. Boyd's evil and stupid hope that Nikki wouldn't be discovered didn't take into account the extent of the concern that Nikki's disappearance provoked in her tight-knit community. A large number of her family, friends and neighbours set about looking for her. Her body was discovered in the basement of the old Exchange building only the next morning by a local teenager. In the police investigation which followed the murder, as I mentioned, Boyd was interviewed by the police who were conducting house-to-house inquiries. The man gave a witness statement in which he said he'd seen Nikki playing in Ware Garth earlier that evening. He told the police that he'd been out getting fish and chips, as I've mentioned, between 9:30 and 10 p.m. that evening, giving himself a neat but wholly false alibi for the time of the murder. Keep in mind that Boyd had seen the prosecution of George Heron and just kept quiet, and it's just such good fortune that Heron was acquitted. He was innocent. Still don't know how Nikki's blood came to be on his clothing, but he didn't kill her. So then after Nikki's murder, after George Heron's acquittal for Nikki's murder, years and years went by. Boyd just got on with his life as if he hadn't done anything, thinking that he'd literally got away with murder. Unluckily for him, the science of DNA analysis was advancing. New developments led the police to identify traces of, this is something I've got no idea of the meaning, YSTR DNA, which matched Boyd's profile on the t-shirt. The DNA that I'm talking about was on the t-shirt and leggings that Nikki had been wearing the night she was murdered. Whilst it's not as specific as autosomal DNA, don't know what that is, the YSTR DNA profile was nonetheless discriminating. Mr. Chapman, the forensic scientist who gave evidence before the jury of Boyd's trial, accepted that the YSTR DNA profile found on Nicky's clothing was not necessarily unique to Boyd. It would have been shared by any male relative of the man's. However, the police investigation effectively ruled out the possibility of another male relative being in the Sunderland area in October 1992. Mr. Chapman also accepted that Boyd's YSTR profile might be shared coincidentally by other males. The chances, however, of the coincidental sharing may have been around 1 in 28,000. The jury had to consider what chance there was of an unrelated man coincidentally sharing Boyd's YSTR DNA profile living within Boyd's local community and who knew Nikki Allan well enough to be able to lure her away from Garth late at night, and who also knew the old exchange building so well that they were able to navigate their way around the place in the dark. The DNA evidence was powerful evidence against Boyd. A review of other witness evidence demonstrated inconsistencies in the account which Boyd had given the police and showed that the alibi that he'd given was totally false, and that was why he was arrested and charged.
You must have inflicted upon her unimaginable terror in the period before that fatal assault. You then took steps to cover your tracks by hiding the body to the extent that you could within that building, and by advancing your false alibi whilst another person stood trial for the murder which you had committed.
Nikki was a 7-year-old girl who was much loved by all who knew her. She had a whole life ahead of her. But on the evening of October 7th, 1992, her future was cruelly taken away from her. David Boyd hid his crime, lying about his involvement and prolonging the family's suffering, knowing all along that he had taken the life of their little girl.
Nikki, the way she was murdered, and I've had to listen to it, it's horrendous. I kind of think in my brain how bad it is. And I thought life would have meant life without parole. I've been let down again by the justice system.
On the 23rd of May 2023 at Newcastle Crown Court, Boyd got life with a minimum of 29 years. Since the man was around 59 years of age at this time, there's every chance that he won't get out. He'll die behind bars. If this video has gripped you, I recommend you to watch this one next. I'll meet you there.